Good evening, everybody. It looks like this stream did not connect. It looks like YouTube just launched a new stream. So let me drop
Of course it did.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Let me drop the new link here. And of course, Rumble didn't play nice. So there we go. I'm curious if I'm live on Twitter. It does look like I am. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Arch. Let's see here. Yep, it's not going. Okay. All right. Well, we are actually live here.
Just another day on the internet.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, so chaos aside, let me get that up now. Okay, so for everybody who is watching, hopefully people are migrating over. What my intention here is to let's get everything back in. Okay, all right. I've got with me today Arch and Mage Leader to talk about Warhammer 40k in the perspective of like what is really the best things about this IP and what drew people to it and what we think that indie creators and people who are looking to take things away from the IP as they're thinking about building their own properties. You know, what drew people in and what was the most important to retain fans over the years. And this is I know that right now 40k is in the zeitgeist for unfortunate reasons due to retcons and you know, potentially no, not really potentially, overtly political changes to lore and things like that. But the goal here is really to talk about what has been great and what's made this franchise great and what's made people love it. So with that in mind, I don't know if anybody who's familiar with 40k who'd be here who's not familiar with Arch, but do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Well, I am Arch, formerly known as Arch Warhammer before Games Workshop copyright struck that, or trademark claimed it, more correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, I've been in 40k for a very long time, and I am probably the first person who started pointing out that wokeism was going everywhere and was thus going to eventually end up in 40k, no matter how immune the setting may have seemed to have been at one point.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember you talking about it for a long time, and it's very cool to finally get to chat with you in person, by the way. I in the chaos leading up to this, I didn't actually get to say that, but it's very cool to sit here and talk to you as we are, you know, things are reaching a crescendo, but I also think that there's a lot of stuff going on in the thank you, I'll turn myself up a bit, in the indie space that hopefully will give people a good outlet to where they can still get the same fix that they want from 40k. Now, Mage, can you tell us a little bit about yourself as well?
Yeah, so a lot of people probably know me as a BattleTech guy. My channel's more or less built around it, but those who've been watching for a while know I didn't start there. My wargaming roots are in 40k. Actually, a big part of my journey into tabletop was with 40k. When I was in college, I actually got into it by watching a bunch of Arch Warhammer's lore videos on it, and the Space Marines were so damn cool that I wound up falling down the rabbit hole. So I consider myself to be a pretty big fan. I was obsessed with it for a good few years there before I finally made the immigration over to BattleTech, where we experienced much the same thing in recent years that 40k has been dealing with. Unfortunately, I did not have the foresight to see that it was coming, because I foolishly believed that the setting was a bit more immune to the things that 40k would have been. Turns out that was an incredibly naive line of thinking. So we're really in it now.
Yeah. So one of the things that I did a Twitter thread earlier this week, and I've done a little bit of research, but is it fair to say that, like, really the Space Marines are the entry point for Warhammer 40k, generally speaking?
I'd say that's kind of fair. A lot of people get in with the orcs. The orcs kind of have a comedy vibe to them that draws a lot of people in, I find. But yeah, I think most people they pick a legion of cool looking space dudes in armor.
Yeah. What was your first entry point, Arch?
Mine was into Warhammer Fantasy back when that existed, way back in the day, with the Chaos Dwarves and Wood Elves. In 40k, I got into that much later, where I started with Blood Angels.
Nice.
Yes. Yeah, I know. I saw several people mentioning Blood Angels as a particular faction that really got them excited and got them more invested. I did a little bit of research, and one of the things that I saw was army lists, and in terms of popularity and everything else, that a lot of people would run Tau or I'm blanking. What are the Dark Eldar now?
With Drukhari?
Drukhari. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know when they stopped being Eldar.
But that was during the great copyright period many years ago, after the Games Workshop lost a lot of copyright claims due to a third-party miniature company, because GW was in the process of trying to copyright claim, well, everything. They tried to copyright claim pauldrons as something unique to 40k there for a while.
That's always my example for how crazy they were in terms of
brings me right back to the React channel. The React bros trying to copyright the word React.
Yeah, I forgot who those were.
Oh man.
But I was going to say, I think, and I believe that OG Warhammer is still played, but it's pales in comparison to 40k, at least in terms of its presence on gaming tables. Correct?
Yeah, I would definitely say so.
It still definitely has a place. With the current editions have been all over the place. Age of Sigmar was a bit of a mess that people, for at least from my experience, really didn't seem to like. There's the old world I think they've come out with recently, which is closer. I haven't really looked into it, but it looks like it's closer to classic Warhammer fantasy type stuff.
Yes, Age of Sigmar was just a brilliant demonstration that without a pre-established setting, GW are not very good at doing anything.
Yeah. It's a little bit unfortunate. Now, I kind of drifted off of it whenever I got into asking when the Eldar stopped being the Eldar, but the Drukhari. But generally, what seems to be the consensus that I've seen, just looking at different numbers and polls and things like that, is people may chase the meta, but almost everybody either plays or has a secondary army of one of the Space Marine chapters. So I'm going to kind of focus in initially, at least, on the Space Marine aspect of this. And I think the most common point that everybody was bringing up is the aesthetics of the Space Marines being what hooks people. And then the depth of lore was another thing that people would cite. I think that the idea of, fighting wave after wave, kind of fighting these super soldiers going up against these monstrous evils, I think that's just a classic, appealing masculine fantasy. But is there anything to the Space Marines that you think was particularly unique that really sets them apart, Arch?
Well, the most appealing thing about the 40k and the Imperium in general is the Gothic style aesthetic, which is not really used in many other places, and particularly early on in 40k, we were in a wave culturally where everything was quite optimistic. Like Star Wars was quite optimistic, evil is defeated. Lord of the Rings, the classic good versus evil story. Everything was very black versus white for a very long time. And 40k came out as a setting that was the exact opposite of that. There was no guarantee that the ring was going to make it to Mordor. In fact, the odds were stacked heavily against the hobbits this time around. One little tagline that I used in my Siege of Rax lore series was that in any other universe, the defenders of Rax would be the heroes, the guys fighting for liberty, etc. And the people coming in their uncountable millions to slaughter every man, woman, and child would be the bad guys. Not in 40k.
Yeah. So one thing that, and I don't know if you've heard the IronAge terminology before, but it's a term that has been it was initially created by, well, it was popularized by Razor Fist, and it's a independent movement. But I've also found that a lot of the literary side has been populated by a lot of authors that have similar ideas, and one of those is kind of a rejection of gray morality. Do you view the 40k universe as having gray morality, or simply one that is lacking in like a clear-cut heroics, or like a clear-cut good guys?
Well, it really does kind of depend on one's definition, because morality is, of course, subjective. The Imperium believes itself to be a moral entity. Obviously, the Eldar believe themselves to be a moral entity. Now, you could argue that like the Tyranids don't really give a shit, but
yeah,
if anything, it is simply a realistic universe in that regard. Like good versus evil somewhat loses a lot of its meaning when you have a universe with this much nuance in terms of chaos, etc., a subversive, constant threat. But you also need a very specific universe to put that in. So it isn't just gray, I'd say, because there are plenty of heroics and there's plenty of hopeful stuff as well. It's just
the setting is very utilitarian because everyone's on the back foot. Everyone's fighting for survival. Everyone's on the brink of extinction. A lot of what you would typically find to be morally good kind of goes out the window. You can't afford it in this world. If you try to be the nice guy, you end up getting absolutely demolished. So it's not typical morality, but there's plenty of room for those types of moral stories. Like Art said, there's plenty of great heroes in it. There's plenty of self-sacrifice, things that we would typically consider to be the good things going on in it. But the big picture of it, it's not really a place where that applies.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is what appealed to a lot of people.
I mean, it's certainly a different perspective than most other places will have. They'll always try to have somebody who the audience relates to. Like, these are clearly the good guys. And 40k is like, yeah, well, I mean, you could see them that way. If you were one of them, you'd probably think they were the good guys.
Yeah. So how do you... Why do you think that 40k has been able to become as successful as it has without the probably one of the most common tricks that people use, which is giving the reader or the consumer somebody to identify with, not necessarily not identity politics, oh, it's me kind of thing, but to invest themselves with in some way.
Rule of cool. Simple as. Space Marines
cool.
Look awesome.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily that there's nobody they can relate to. Individual characters are all over the place that are incredibly relatable. and that are very enjoyable. People can identify with them quite well. The lore is full of characters like that. The books are full of characters like that. But it's that they're set in such an interesting backdrop that you get to see kind of a unique perspective on how these sorts of characters react in this kind of world. It's also refreshing because they can come from anywhere at any time.
Mm-hmm. Is it a fair assessment to say that, we kind of rejected the idea of this being a total gray morality as, in the sense that it's usually used. But is it fair to assess that a lot of the well-loved characters are perhaps moral characters in an immoral world? You know what I mean? Or at least in a situation where there isn't room for any kind of traditional morality.
You need look no further than Nathaniel Garrow and Garvio Loken. They're some of the most popular Space Marine characters out there. These are guys who are in traitor Space Marine legions who remain loyal to the Emperor, and it's a case of choosing what they believe to be right over this rebellion, which also sees itself as right. So yeah, like it's like there's plenty of that sort of thing.
Now, Arch, as far as some of the more recent lore, I mean, do you feel like this, these characters, this background, is this something that, has been consistent throughout 40K and it's only recently that it's changed? Or when do you think that these, I don't have a good grasp on when these various stories were released. I know some of these characters, but I don't really know when they entered into the lore.
40K remained very consistent for the better part of about 30 years, with very minor changes in storylines and general plot. In fact, one of the primary complaints that people had about 40K was that it was being too stagnant. This was another thing also that got a lot of people interested, that came from other universes like Star Wars, for example, that had a very evolutionary form of canon where no one really seemed to know what the hell was real, and there was a lot of independent people making their own versions and stories of it. Where even George Lucas himself basically said that he only really cares about the movies and everything else is just do what you want with.
Yeah.
So 40K remained very consistent for a very, 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 very long time.
Yeah. And one of the things that people always bring up is like some original Rogue Trader first edition type stuff. Like, oh yes, well, originally like there was a female Space Marine here, or there was this character over here. And like it's one edition from right when the thing was starting out. There's the prototype. They're still feeling things out. And then there's a hard cutoff where they establish what they're doing. And then for decades, it doesn't change at all. So it's a non-argument, but it's one that they love to bring up.
It's also the thing that there never was a female Space Marine. That did not exist. There was one in a fan magazine, not GW, the Sunstrikes.
Yeah.
And the other one brought up the female warrior is a sister of Sin, actually, as you can see by the iconography.
Yeah. Yeah. But even if it was official, it doesn't even matter because, like, of course, they eventually they were, the lore was a little bit looser back then, but they eventually got it nailed down, and then it just didn't change.
Yes. And Rogue Trader is not 40K either. Like, Rogue Trader was them going like, well, Warhammer Fantasy is pretty popular. Let's make a science fiction knockoff.
Isn't that where we get Inquisitor Obi-Wan Cluso or whatever his name is? Should look him up on Google Images if you've never seen it before. Because
I have not.
Oh, dude, you got to see this.
Well, I think one of the things that I would just like to kind of highlight here, though, is that for 30 years, the building of lore. Now, during this time, things were very consistent, but they were still growing. I mean, were they consistently putting out fiction, or was it just like rule books, or were they putting out novels? What kind of content were they putting out throughout the history? I know more recently they've been licensing like crazy into video games and all sorts of things.
Mostly Black Library was one of the big sources for lore back then, which was novels.
Yeah.
That was a big thing. And they did put out codexes, rulebook updates, but they only did so every few, not even years, like it could be years and years between editions back then. Whereas now it seems like you're a couple of years in and there's a new edition releasing, probably because GW wants a bit more of an income consistently as well.
Yeah, and just kind of as an aside for myself to understand GW as a company. Now, I was looking at, I don't remember what quarter it was from, but some of their most recent, like stockholder reports and everything else. And I mean, to me, based on what I was reading there, it remains that they very much see themselves as a miniature company, first and foremost.
Oh, yeah. They have always
and
clarified
obviously
that they are
licensing.
a plastic toy manufacturer first.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, that's how they got their start, was making miniatures for other war games and other board games.
Yep. They actually started making tables. The first thing they did, Games Workshop started making wargaming tables for other settings.
Interesting. That's expensive. I've looked into getting a dedicated wargaming table, and it's like, I'm gonna wait.
It's cheaper to build it yourself, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly. So, with that in mind, what they've, I would say a lot of what they've done recently, at least kind of in the past 10 years, which is really as long as I've been aware of, really following 40k. I read some 40k. I never really played it until, I don't know, probably like 7-8 years ago. And then I'm not I don't have an army or anything like that I've painted up.
You'd be surprised at how common that actually is.
Yeah, that is true. But the sense that I got was that they started kind of accelerating their turnover on models and updating, because they moved from being a very consistent kind of like you were saying, much slower pace, and now it's every 3 to 5 years you're probably going to end up having to buy a new army. Is that a fair assessment?
Thereabouts. I mean, it's not so much that you have to get a whole new army. There's a lot of new stuff that comes out that they make really good, but most of it's in books.
Okay. Yeah. So, all right.
It does happen with the models too. I remember they released some kind of primaris sniper. I forget exactly what it was called, but
the entire primaris range was exactly selling Space Marines.
Yeah, but they made the Primaris Marines better than regular Space Marines, so you were basically handicapping yourself if you weren't taking Primaris Marines. But even with the Primaris Marines being around, they released like a special unit of snipers that were obscenely good. And so now it's like, okay, well, your Space Marine army is getting absolutely massacred unless they have these guys, and then you're sweeping the table clean of anything. They could do heavy damage to vehicles, they could shoot through buildings. It was ridiculous.
GW has learned many a valuable lesson from riots and MOBAs in general.
So that's another kind of thing that I was curious about is, do you think that the increase of video games and, as a market share, I mean, gaming is huge now. Has that changed Games Workshop thinking about how they're handling their IP, do you think?
To a degree, definitely. They were very hesitant back in the day about giving out their license to anybody, but the success of Dawn of War changed that. And these days, they're handing out their license to pretty much anyone, but they're doing it piecemeal. So you have to pay them for every piece you want to include. So if you want Space Marines, that's a separate license deal. If you want the Lehman Russ tank, that might be a separate license deal. If you want the Imperial Guard and so on.
They certainly don't seem to care as much for the quality of the video games, because before we got things like Space Hulk, we got things like oh geez, I'm trying to remember. They had like an XCOM clone that I can't remember the name of off the top of my head. They were really good games. And then the Dawn of War came out and it was spectacular. We had Space Marine. Space Marine it's still one of my favorite games of all time. And now we get a bunch of hit or miss type of stuff. You know, you've got Vermintide and then you've got Space Hulk Deathwing, and then you've got Gladius, and don't even get me started on the mobile games.
Yep. Yeah. They're just handing it out now because
it's just throw shit at the wall and see if it sticks.
Yeah,
pretty much.
So I guess one of the things that I'm kind of drilling towards here is, you know, earlier one of the big things that lots of people cited was the depth of lore, but you know, there's an effect that some people, I can't remember who it was, but somebody coined the term of more time in the sun, where it's like, I just want more exposure to this thing, whether it's whatever. And, you know, do you feel like the novels and the stuff that they were putting out, say 20 years ago, was overall of a better quality? Or was it more kind of like just more time in the, like what's the disconnect? Where did the wheels kind of start to come off between what you're seeing now, where it's like, well, video games, they're just kind of tossing it out there and we're not very excited, versus before people were saying that having more stuff is just part of the perk. You know what I'm saying?
I wouldn't necessarily say that the fiction itself has gotten worse. A lot of the new lore is pretty bad. Dark Imperium, pretty much everybody agrees was a massive mistake, but it's a bit of shoveled together lore to try and sell the new true scale Space Marines that they're trying to put out. And it was a very weak justification, but I don't think the regular novels that are just set as regular 40k events all seem to be, at least in my experience, about the same quality as they've always been, at least since I've been in the hobby.
What was the name of that thing they released that killed off Cadia? Gathering Storm.
Yeah, Gathering Storm. Yeah, that was...
The Gathering Storm is the definitive moment at which GW changed significantly. That was the point where they went, let's move the storyline forward. And I've been warning for years that do you want GW to move the storyline forward? They're not very good at this.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, it's one of the. It's like I was talking with you about BattleTech before we started. It's like it doesn't necessarily need to move forward. We're in a good spot. You're gonna start breaking things.
Yeah. It's. I wish that there was a way to. It seems like a lot of these things are just never done with the proper care. You know.
I think it's just a question of they don't realize why it is that their story is working at the moment. The thing that people like about 40k, from what I've seen, is that it's not so much a story as it is a backdrop for stories. The universe is so huge, it's so over the top. You can have any kind of story you want in the present day in 40k, and it's completely plausible, and it doesn't hurt the lore at all. You could have a planet of My Little Pony getting decimated by Space Marines, and while it would be silly and stupid, the Imperium's so big, it's not necessarily out of the question. You can do pretty much whatever you want with it. But that all changes when you start moving the lore forward, and now you're making actual changes that people have to abide by. I think that it takes a lot of the freedom away. People like that freedom that's present in 40k.
Yes, a lot of the time people don't know what they're asking for. Like, okay, I want the story to move forward. Yes, but it's not going to move forward well. And it's not going to move forward slowly, because that's not how you sell anything. Because the story was moving forward slowly in that you had the adventures of Uriel Ventris, you had Ragnar Blackmane, you had Gaunt's Ghosts. You had lots of stories moving forward, but they wanted the entire setting. And the problem is, if you shift the entire setting forward, it will by necessity be by drastic margins. You will upset the balance of the entire universe.
And this is how you get inconsistencies like the Tau Empire supposedly being able to develop new technologies on the fly, but they've been using the same battle suits for the past 3,000 years.
Yes, because it becomes necessary to. I mean, the entire thing with the Primaris Marines, like, yes,
Oh
there's
my
this
God.
guy. He's called Cole. He's been building millions of Space Marines in complete secret. Nobody's noticed.
And then when he unveils them, he is not immediately executed for tech heresy like he should be by the rest of the Mechanicus, because what he's done is one of the most grievous sins that their order even has. But no, everyone's just kind of cool with it.
The fuckers made AI, and Gilliman just nods along, like, yeah, sure, this is fine.
Oh, we have abominable intelligence, the thing my dad really hated. Okay.
Yeah, and so I think that
the Mechanicus should have assassinated Call like within minutes of him revealing this.
Well, here's a question, especially for you, Arch. Do you feel like the scale at which the lore had developed, right? Because the scale of 40k is just unbelievable, right? And did that kind of necessitate things grinding to a halt over time? Should there, you know what I mean? Or was there a better way for GW to kind of, well, I mean, obviously there probably was, but like, what are your thoughts on moving something that has grown this large forward? Or should it kind of just slow down over time?
It should have been done on individual basis. It should have been done with a very long plot line development. They should have Horus Herestied it, basically. Because you then need to come up with, get all of your writers together and go, okay, we're going to move the story forward. I need an epic. It's going to be dozens of books, and we're going to bring in all of these new characters, and the characters will then push the story forward. It'll be very slow and it'll be very massive, but you can easily make that into a marketable affair. I mean, 30k is literally become its own board game now.
Yeah.
Instead, they became impatient and they wanted the true scale Space Marines and the primaries now, because I'm guessing sales were flagging in Space Marines because everybody already had a Space Marine army, so they really needed a way to get you to buy Space Marines again. And so they did all of it in one source book, which was like, I think a dozen pages of lore tops in it, where they destroyed.
I had no idea.
Yeah,
they destroyed.
It was quite
Cadia.
something.
They introduced Cole. They introduced the Space Marines. Gilliman came back. It's like, okie dokie. A lot of shit happened, and it happened fast.
Yeah.
So let me start pulling some of these things together, and I am going to see if I can't get this up without breaking everything here. But within the, hold on here, try and get this working. And I'll share this. All right, let me see if I can do that. Yeah, I got it. All right, so let me try and get this on screen here. But I'm just going to kind of start taking this. And I was going to say what I've got are a series of different what amount to notes here. And I'm going to be kind of creating these as we go with various concepts that we talked about. And I forgive me for my spelling, guys.
You're right the first time.
I'm hypothetically an editor for Anvil magazine, but I actually have somebody else check my spelling, so you know that's fine.
Yeah.
Right.
Consistency has a C before the Y.
Well, you know,
you were right. You were right on the first attempt. You corrected it and made it wrong.
Okay, I don't know
There
if
you
I
go.
know how to spell. Anyway,
That's close enough. Whatever.
well, whatever.
Yeah.
And you know what's really funny is I actually wrote it on my desk correctly, but I'm not going to try and do it again. But the things that we want to talk about here also are the it's not gray, it's complicated, essentially, but the morality. And I'll be probably posting these out and doing a little bit more talking about them to where we can discuss this a little bit more. Let me see if I can't. No, that's going to be the best way to do things. But I think the main thing that I'm kind of taking away from these things is that you want to still have that like the key features of 40k, I would say, are the aesthetics of it, the scale of the battle going on, and whenever I talk about the aesthetics, it's also kind of that rule of cool, right? So you're prioritizing a very
it's more than just a look.
feeling.
It's a whole vibe.
Yeah. So I would say, what Arch, what would you say if we're gonna put this into terms for the Zoomers out there? What would you say? What vibe is it?
Well, it literally invented the term Grimdark, so
Yeah.
it is a dark universe, devoid of hope, devoid of niceties.
And it really, I mean, it beyond just being grimdark, you are correct. I mean, it set itself apart from all of the other sci-fi out there. I mean, this is very different than, say, a lot of the depressing, kind of like downbeat.
It's the anti-Star Trek.
Well, I mean, not only is it like the anti-Star Trek, but it's also the very different than a lot of the other 90s kind of like dark futurism, where you have something like Alien to a certain degree, or well, I guess Alien came before that, but you know, these dystopian futures that became popular
Blade Runner.
Blade Runner and the various cyberpunk novels, and then later movies, kind of culminating with The Matrix, which, you know, you can argue maybe that's not totally dystopian in its messaging at the very end, but I mean, it's very much dystopian world. So, I mean, it's Judge Dredd. It's dystopian, but it's not. I mean, I would say that it sort of embraces that. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I'd say so. Though, I mean, with Judge Dredd is also fairly grimdark in a very similar way to 40k. I found
that is true.
40k did borrow a fair few things from Judge Dredd. I think the biggest difference is that Judge Dredd is more of a uni-focused setting. It's focused on the judges, largely. Whereas in 40k, you don't necessarily need to identify with the Space Marines. A lot of people do, but you could be a Chaos player, or an Eldar player, or an Imperial Guard fan, etc. Whereas in Judge Dredd, you know, the judges are the star central figures.
They are the law.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
or you can play as there's a whole faction, all pseudo sub faction, I guess I'd call it, in 40k that's basically the judges. You have the Adeptus Arbites. It's basically just straight up copy paste Judge Dredd into 40k.
Yep. Yeah. You ripped off the helmet really badly.
The whole armor is like almost identical. It's hilarious.
So we would actually we're just gonna say it's kind of like the
that's another strong point with it. If there's something you like in fiction or science fiction, there's a good chance that 40k has copied it, and there's something very close to it that's available for you. Even if you're a Star Trek player, the Tau exist.
Yeah,
they're fairly Starfleet-ish.
Yeah, I do feel like the Tau are kind of like I don't necessarily think they're the good guys, but I think they're kind of like the skin deep.
They're the ones who are trying to be nice.
Yeah. So I would say that with the what would you call it? Kind of like a broad inspiration. You know what I mean? Is that a fair?
Very broad. They
Yeah.
particularly took more than one or two notes from Frank Herbert's Dune. And
I
back
mean,
then,
yeah.
of course, that was acceptable. I mean, hell, Disney has created that entire empire of looking at other people's fairy tales and going, mine now.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I don't necessarily think that.
Rip the entire concept of chaos right out of Elric, even down to the chaos symbol itself.
Yep. They did do that. And that was fine, too. Like, you can have inspiration from different universes and bring them together to create something new. It only becomes a problem when you then look at the thing you have obviously cobbled together from different people's things and go, no, mine thing now. I'm going to copyright strike you because you use pauses.
Yeah.
That's so hilarious.
Well, I think I believe Razorfist was quoting somebody when he said this, but the difference between what is it, plagiarism and inspiration is attribution, and so I think that there's one thing that, and Arch, I don't know how many indie creators you've talked to or anything like that, but I've talked to quite a few, and one thing that I see very commonly, especially in the newer creators, is that they're concerned about sharing too much because they're like, well, I don't want to really it's this thing, and I don't want to share too much. And I'm not talking about like plot points to their upcoming novel or something like that, but the general idea that they have. And I mean, my thing is, I always say, like, talk about your inspirations as much as possible, because I mean, as long as you're drawing from enough like different sources and putting your own spin on things, even if you tell people what to look for, they may not see, at least not in any way that's going to leave a bad taste in their mouth. You're not necessarily going to see the serial numbers from the original.
I think people are concerned that people are going to say that you're ripping off something, but in my experience, the effect has been the exact opposite. So, for example, I'm working on a novel that I described as Redwall in the Pike and Shot era, with a bit more fantasy element to it, and people were friggin' excited. I was like, that sounds super cool. I'm down for that. I want to see that because that sounds like a really good concept. So honestly, like if you think that wearing your inspirations on your sleeve is going to cause problems, it's probably actually just going to be really good marketing, because people get excited about the concept of something they already enjoy, but in a new way.
Yeah. Would you agree with that sentiment, Arch?
Largely. I think people just kind of need to realize that everything has already been done at this point, and probably has already been done for 6,000 years. And you're just going to have to accept that you are going to have inspiration. You are going to be formed by the media you have consumed, by the world you have lived in, etc. And so long as you transform it adequately to create a new whole, I don't see any problems with it.
Yeah.
People put a little bit too much value on what they perceive as originality. That there's a good chance that your favorite author is not as original as you think. I mean, J.R.R. Tolkien created an amazing world with Lord of the Rings, but he was inspired too. He drew a lot of inspiration from dozens of different mythologies around the world because it was his passion. It was what he loved to do. So there's a good amount of other things in Lord of the Rings that aren't wholly original to Tolkien, but he created as he went, and he put a new spin on things, and he added a lot of his own elements to it. So, and that's why it's such a beautiful thing that we all love, and it's very specifically Tolkien.
Yep, and these things then in turn inspire new generations.
Exactly.
There was a time where the entire genre of science fiction was considered garbage tier writing, dime store novels at best. Now, some of the best storytelling around is in science fiction, and Star Wars, of course, which upon its original release, was considered a very lowbrow action movie, is considered an absolute classic, which will in turn inspire other things, and eventually Star Wars will disappear into the midst of history, and then other things will be inspired by what it spawned, and so on and so on.
But what's the most successful civilization in human history? It's the Romans. What did they do? They stole pretty much everything that worked from other cultures.
Yes.
So their entire religious system is stolen from other cultures. Their system of warfare, their engineering, it was all taken from other places and then iterated on and improved upon. Well, depending on who you ask, generally speaking, improved upon in order to make something bigger and better. It's not just storytelling; it's all over. It's how humans work. Embrace the humanity.
Yes. I see Skull Fox Games. Did you have an opinion on Dawn of War, Arch?
On Dawn of War,
being good or bad for 40k?
Oh, definitely good. It brought a lot of more people into it.
Yeah.
It's such a great, enjoyable. It's basically just a real-time conversion of the tabletop in a lot of ways. It's getting a more active version of the thing that people were already playing and having fun with. So for people who love the tabletop game, it's basically just manna from heaven.
Yeah, I will say I do love my wargaming, but my goodness, it can be time consuming. You know what I mean? It's like
Dawn
there's
of
a lot
War
of
is
dice to roll,
so
a lot of
good.
stages.
Dawn of War is so good. I suck at RTS games, and I don't really like them all that much. But Dawn of War is one of my favorite games. It's that good.
All right, Arch, are you? You know, I know that you have you've mentioned that you have something in mind. Is it wargaming related, or do you not want to even touch on it?
It is wargaming related, but we are building our setting on a very different idea, because we are building a universe first, and then we are building the game second.
Yeah.
Similar to what Blaine Pardo's doing with Land and Sea.
Yeah. Have you seen anything of Land and Sea, Arch?
I've heard about it, and I've seen it on Twitter occasionally, but I don't know much about it.
It's a really fun series.
Giant crab aliens attack Earth.
Yeah, basically, I love it because the aliens come to Earth and then they're in the ocean for years, and then they decide to invade essentially the land, and so it's a lot of fun. I love the way that Blaine does the stories, and for anybody who's
Pacific Rim.
I'm gonna show Anvil number 4 because it's got a Land
Pacific
and Sea
Rim
story
meets BattleTech meets Independence Day.
Yeah, with a heavy
with
dose
a dash of Tom
well
Clancy.
done military sci-fi.
Yeah, exactly. Dash of Tom Clancy in there.
Yeah. I don't want to call it stagnant. I want to say
sedentary.
I would say it was
stable.
Slow moving, and
I would say it's a very stable setting, or at least it used to be. Yeah.
There we go. I'm trying to think of a good word here. Get some of these dang templates out of the way.
I've got good news for you. You have an author with you. I can help you with this.
Well, yeah, good. Oh my goodness, that was that whole thing. Oh well, whatever.
Oops.
I love Jamboards, man. They're just sometimes they're complete garbage. This one's not doing what I wanted it to in terms of like snapping, but whatever.
You've got one there twice.
Yeah, I was going to say something else, then I forgot what I was doing.
It's a beautiful flow chart. I love it.
Yeah, I was just going to say,
do
we
step
have
2.
anything else?
Do step 2 again. Variety of perspectives, I'd say, because you got there are books centered around the different factions. You got some that are about the Eldar, some that are about the Tau. They all have great characters that people love. So it doesn't really matter what you're into. There's a character for you.
Yeah.
We got tons of people simping for Shadow Sun.
Unless you're into the Iron Hands.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say I would love to see some
Farsight versus
war
Shadow
games.
Sun debate is massive among all 7 Tau players,
Well,
of which I am one.
okay, well, good. I was going to say, I actually, according to some of them, I thought there were a fair number of Tau players.
There's a decent amount. I mean, they were really good when they came out. Almost too well, actually, not almost. They were just too good when they came out, and it was annoying.
Yeah.
And now people hate them.
Yeah.
But no, I'm a mecha fan, so of course I gravitated toward Tau. Also, I think that they're an interesting contrast with the rest of the setting, where they're trying to be the nice guys, but constantly having the universe stomp on their neck and spit in their face, and I find that amusing.
Yeah. And yeah, Paladin's also doing a war game project. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on. So let's see here. As far as the characters, I mean, a lot of what I've thought about is, I mean, also these are just like good believable characters. I mean, I hate to say like well-written characters, but I sometimes think
the first book I ever read of 40k, well, it's actually 30k. I read Horus Rising, and I loved Garviel Lokid's character. So he is still possibly my favorite character in all of the lore.
Yeah, and I think that that's one thing that sometimes doesn't get appreciated, is that like you really need to have good ways to set the hook. Sometimes I think people tend to either go for, I'm going to design this one thing and I'm going to get every single thing right on this one thing, or they go like the other way and they're like, I'm just going to throw everything out there. I'm going to have a ton of stuff to talk about. And it's really important that you need to have good hooks and ways into, like good on-ramps for the universe. In that sense, Arch, do you think that are the Space Marines, I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but in your mind, the Space Marines are a good on-ramp for 40k?
Yes, and 40k also had the advantage of being an actual storefront. That cannot be underestimated in 40k's success either as a war game, because they were able to actually make storefronts and push their own products and bring people in and give them the introductions to the universe that would otherwise only happen through, well, word of mouth or accidental discovery.
Mm-hmm. That's something. So that we haven't really talked about at all, but it's something that I was talking about last night with Herman P. Hunter on IronAge Nights, and that is, that physical, like having a physical presence somewhere. This was as an author, actually meeting people and making contact with them. It creates a very different impression. And I think, is it fair to say that because it started out as a war game and you had people making memories together, that created a much higher rate of like those super fans, those kinds of like evangelical fans that you're always desperate to get as a creative?
Probably. The community aspect of it all definitely helped. It's also just the simple fact that if you canvass 1,000 people and 1% of them becomes a super fan, then, well, the more 1,000 people you canvass, the better.
Yeah.
And again, GW's position within wargaming cannot be overstated. They are wargaming. Like the closest competitors they have run like tiny web shops.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that, well, look at Catalyst Game Labs. Not to get too far off, but I mean, it's really, to me, becoming clear that CGL unfortunately is just a few full-time people, and there's a lot of shoestring budgeting going on. It seems it's
a double-edged sword. There's parts of it that make it disadvantage in terms of your product, but at the same time, it also means that when the fans get upset about something, it actually has an impact, and the company is behooved to take better notice of it. It's one of the advantages that's unique to that particular thing, because, well, not to get too far off in the weeds, but with BattleTech, the fans are so used to making fan-produced stuff because they went without official support for decades. Fans are so used to having that. They have the infrastructure there. They have the networking there already. They've already been doing this for a long time. They don't need Catalyst. And because Catalyst is small, if people actually stop buying their stuff in even somewhat decent numbers, it makes a big dent. Whereas a big company like Games Workshop, if a few people get upset, it's not a big deal because they've got the whales who are going to buy the new stuff in the new edition every time because they're addicted to the plastic crack.
Well, do you agree with that, Arch, or do you think that there's a similar potential to alter the course of Games Workshop at this time?
Well, there is a potential. There's always a potential. Like if Disney can be seen to have financial losses, then Games Workshop most certainly can. But BattleTech has many advantages when it comes to trying to fight against the wokeism within its ranks, because it has way more of a habit of being independent. It has way more of the infrastructure set up. The secondhand market is a lot stronger. And that is definitely a very beneficial thing.
We've been ignoring new product for the past 20 years because it's all sucked anyway. So we're used to just ignoring whatever the company puts out. We ignored Dark Age and Jihad almost entirely, and I've yet to meet in person a single Ilkon fan because the era is just trash.
Yep. There is the opposite side, which is less ideal though, and that is also the fact that with a very small market and a very small company, it's a lot harder to kill it because, as far as I'm understanding, Catalyst Games Lab isn't even operating by itself. It still needs Kickstarters and crowdfunding to keep releasing stuff.
Yep.
I don't know. That's something that I've kind of wondered about myself is like, do they actually need that, or are they just taking advantage of?
No, they do need it. Any company that can go with regular funding, something that's more reliable in that regard, is going to go for it. Crowdfunding is something you resort to in this sort of space, and their Kickstarters have been massive. They've been record-breaking. Yeah, but the fact that they have to do it at all is a big deal.
Logitech kickstarted a freaking document camera, so I don't know. I don't know if it's as clear
with
cut.
that, it's more of a niche product that probably wouldn't have sold all that much in regular store shelves. So, like, do we invest the R&D on this and release it normally, or do we test the waters and see if it actually has a market first? That's what I see that as.
Yeah, fair enough. But all right, real blah blah blah. Reeling it back in here, what I was going to say is, when we're looking at this though, from somebody who's trying to create a universe. Now, Arch, you said that you're starting with the universe, and for example, Blanley Pardo started with the universe, started with lore and getting people invested with characters. Do you think that somebody who's looking to build a, not saying that they're trying to build like a 40k clone, but they're trying to look and they see what has been done with 40k, and they see like all this cool stuff, whether it be games or tabletop or whatever, that they have a idea for a franchise with all these different pieces. Do you feel like the correct starting point is really with lore and characters and things like that? Or is that just where the market is most accessible, you think, or what do you think?
Well, the benefit of starting with lore is it's easy and relatively cheap. If you're going to start trying to make a war game right off the bat, 3D modeling is expensive. Even if you're making it STL files, expensive. If you're going to try and make actual physical models, God help you.
Yeah.
etc., etc. Whereas if you start with a universe, it's a lot easier to create a customer base with a relative minimum of commitment from your side. Plus, you've got to create something interesting first. And even if you do create something interesting, you're starting so far behind everybody else that you have to think long-term and economically about it. You're competing with companies that have been around for decades, that have had loyal fan bases for decades, that have enormous contracts with providers, and they have all of their lore out there. They've got television series, they've got YouTube channels, they've got books. The lore is simply the most logical place to start for a long-term investment of time and effort, in my opinion.
Yes.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And
there is a bit of a trap you can fall into. This is more for like the novel writing side. I see a lot of people, they want to write a book and they start in by building a world and a universe, and they get so lost in the nitty-gritty details that they end up kind of paralyzed and unable to actually write a story. And the advice I give for that sort of thing is to take the approach that Brian Jakes did with Redwall. You get the basics nailed down, you make a good story set there, and that allows you to bend the rules of the world around in order to suit one good story. And then you expand on that. But the important thing, the key, is consistency. Make sure you're taking notes of what you've already done and don't contradict yourself. Play by the rules that you set. You can set the rules as you go, but once you set a rule, you have to follow it from then on. And that's what I think is the best way to write a story in a new setting that you created. So if you're not building a whole tabletop game system, you're just trying to write books and maybe a series or something like that, don't get so into writing the lore that you don't end up writing the story that's in the lore.
It's better to start with a handful of presuppositions. The universe that I'm working on, along with my partner, we basically figured, okay, we are going to base it all on philosophical assumptions, because that will create a solid fundament for each faction. Each faction is going to be based on some sort of solid philosophy, and everything else flows from there. Because once you have figured out their philosophical view of the universe, you can determine everything else. How they live, how they work, how they fight, how they mate, etc. It all stems from the same area.
Yep. Yeah, like I said, you get the basics, make sure that you have enough meat on the bones to get a good story. And then as the story develops, as you start writing something interesting in there, go ahead and add some more details in. But the big thing is to play by your own rules. If you start breaking your own rules, people lose interest. They suddenly, now there's no stakes because anything can happen at any time, and you lose your audience. So the key to building a world for storytelling purposes is consistency.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And now, as far as getting the getting that first look, though, a big part of this, I think, also is with the aesthetic and the art and the design of these miniatures. Now, I think that, I mean, going almost all the way back, Warhammer, even like before 40k, Warhammer has always had very cool art and great minis and everything else. With that kind of leverage and that first look, you know, there's been a whole discussion, which hopefully you've been ignorant of, on Twitter about book covers for indie authors and things like that. What's an appropriate amount to spend and everything else. But, you know, I subscribe to the idea that like a cover, the goal is to get somebody to pick it up. And you can say that, okay, that's the cover of the book, but that's really for any piece of visual medium whenever you're writing lore. What are your thoughts on, like, whenever you're having art developed for something like this? Would you agree that that's critical? And if so, within the thematic element of it, do you think that like the Gothic aspects of 40k were critical to its success? Uh-oh.
Nope.
Arch?
Hello?
Hey. Do you feel like the what I was saying is like with the visuals there with the 40k and the gothic aesthetics of it, you mentioned that early on. Do you think that's something that was critical to conveying the sort of world that people were getting into, that communicated not only interest, not only was it visually stimulating, but it also communicated something to the potential reader or player before they even picked anything up and started looking at it?
Oh, absolutely. I think the art of John Blanche, in particular, was instrumental to set the general style of the setting as something quite different from everything else that was around at the time. And they are very standout pieces. Like, all of them have stunning characters, stunning vistas, a very bright and bold usage of colors. It draws the eye immediately.
There's a reason why so many people like Bretonia. You got these big knights with their massive bold colors on their heraldry. They look positively heroic. I mean, that's the whole reason why they're my favorite Warhammer army. Like, the lore around them, I care about a little bit, and people make fun of them for all kinds of things. But like, dude, look at them; they're cool as hell.
Yeah.
First impressions are a big deal for any sort of media. The first thing that's going to grab your audience's eye is going to be your cover art. It's going to be your concept art. So I think what a lot of people look for in it is the passion that's behind it. It's if you have good art, it shows that you're confident in what you've made. Like, hey, check this out. Look at how cool this is. Come on in and have a good time. If you skimp out on it, if you try and get by with something that's the bare minimum to get through, it's going to carry across, and people are going to notice.
And I guess going back to this, part of what I was thinking is, in a lot of ways, I didn't necessarily do this intentionally, but I feel like this is sort of the work from left to right to a certain degree. You want to get the vibe and the ideas lined up. This is the way that you onboard people. I mean, is this kind of a fair idea? This is just something that I thought of as I was staring at this on my other screen. Is you have to get the vibe right. You got to get people to pick it up, and then you have to get people invested in characters, in stories. Maybe not characters, but plots, whatever your hook is, in order to get them into wanting more. And from there, it's the lore and the consistency and the volume that you have. And let's not say war game. Let's just say physical media. You know what I mean? Before you start going into physical media, like heavily into at least specialty physical media, you really need to. That's the final step. Is that yeah? I mean, does that make sense to you guys?
I think so, largely.
Yeah.
Because you have to have that thing that gets them interested first.
Yes.
Yep. Like I was just saying, first impressions. Like,
yep, absolutely.
You got to grab the attention and suck them in. I mean, if Space Marines didn't look cool, 40k wouldn't be anywhere near as popular.
So, all right. Well, let's see here. We've run a little over an hour. I don't want to keep you guys too late. Thank you so much, Arch, Mage. I really enjoyed talking to you guys. I'm a relative neophyte whenever it comes to 40k, so I appreciate you lending me your wisdom and your insights there. I've really enjoyed everything that I've seen from you so far, Mage and Arch. I'm really excited to see what you come up with here. Do you have any kind of a timeline on your project?
No, not at all.
Not at all. Okay. All right.
It's being put together whenever there's time, ability, and inspiration. We have a rule set system set up now, which we're very happy with. As what we need to think about a lot was how to not be 40k.
Yes, yeah. Because you, especially you, Arch, you need to be very careful about being not 40k.
Yes,
stepped on toes there a little bit
shoulder
already.
Pauldrons, possibly no helmets. I'm not sure. Maybe no boots. Maybe shoes. Who knows?
No
Who knows
hammers that could be used for warfare.
Yeah, exactly. They're not. In fact, it's not even really a war game per se. It's definitely no hammers, no war. It's more of a conflict. Maybe conflict axe or something to that effect.
Well, the conflict part is actually very important because one of the things that 40k has also done is that it has set the style for how a war game is supposed to be. You roll the dice and you do hit point damage and stuff like that.
Yeah.
We wanted to move away from that as much as possible to the point where the goal of the game is going to be to have it possible to destroy enemy units as much by maneuvering as it is to actually shoot them.
That sounds like a good amount of fun.
I have
clever as a BattleTech fan, clever positioning is a huge part of that game, and it's incredibly satisfying when you pull off a good maneuver.
That's one of the things that I've always loved about BattleTech. The location based damage. It's a little bit fiddly. I have a just for kind of screwing around, and as a challenge to myself, I put together a little setting, an RPG style setting. And as I was thinking about it, I put together kind of a war game concept, because I've had a damage model for dice rolling. I was toying between like 3d6 and 2d8 kind of thing, and trying to speed up the gameplay of BattleTech while still retaining some of the unique feeling that you have with it. And so I think, I think that sounds very interesting. I'm really excited to see when that, whenever that comes out. Anybody who wants to find you, Arch, if it's not, I'll make sure, because I had to at the last second. I don't know. I don't know what YouTube did here, but
you crossed the streams. God damn you!
For anybody who's watching, I think Arch's channel is in the description. If not, it'll be dropped in the chat again shortly. Is there anybody anywhere else that people should try and find you?
YouTube is the best place to find me.
All right. Let me. There we go. I knew I had a notepad note with it. Here, I'll just drop this in chat. And then, Mage, you have your latest novel, which is "And Hell Followed with Him," which I am enjoying. I highly recommend. You got a nice shout out from Razor Fist.
Yep.
Anybody who wants to check that out, it's in the chat. Do you want to give us just a real quick pitch?
Sure.
On it.
So yeah, and Hell Followed with Him follows the story of a circuit riding minister by the name of Elijah Sheffield. And he is a circuit riding preacher. So basically means that he rides between one town to the next, kind of your typical drifter, but with more of a purpose behind him. But he moonlights as a bounty hunter, as sort of a ways of drumming up some funding for the local churches that he goes to. So that they can have nice cushions in the pews or whatever it is that they need. And he rolls into a particular town that is beset by bandits from without and corrupt men from within, who are generally oppressing the people within the town. He finds himself at a massive disadvantage, and he needs to find a way to protect the members of his flock that he loves and avoid being sent to meet his God in a more personal manner.
Awesome. Yes, I was gonna say I do recommend it. And for anybody who is not familiar or joining us for the first time, I run IronAge.media, which talks about all sorts of indie comics and novels, and occasionally video games and movies as well. So go over there if you want to find new indies and stay up on what's happening. There's also prompts that I put up every Wednesday. If you're interested in writing short fiction, you can submit there and get some people reading your stuff and get some feedback and build a following while you're at it. The other big thing that I do is ANVIL Magazine, which you can find currently issue number 4 over on Indiegogo if you want to use Indiegogo, or if you want to buy it direct from anvilmagazine.com. It's a collection of short fiction, indie short fiction, art, and a comic. I just saw Ken B in the chat. He's the artist for the comic this time. Paladin Dragoon is in there. Blanley Pardo has a story. It's tons of great stuff. If you have any questions about it, feel free to drop me a line, and I'd be happy to talk to you about it. So
one of these days, I'm going to put a submission into that.
Yes, yeah, please do. And yeah, please, hurry up because
Yeah, I do actually have a little thing that I've been working on in the background. So we'll see what comes of it.
awesome. Yeah, I may have. Anyway, I'll talk to you afterwards.
All right.
But with that, thank you guys for thank you everybody who showed up to watch. I appreciated your input, and I know I didn't get to everybody's comments and whatnot on from Twitter and everything, but it's great. We're probably gonna do a follow-up stream, and we're gonna just do some tinkering around. Maybe this is Creative Crunch. My original idea was to kind of prototype something out live, but I think these deconstructions are also good. So maybe with the next one of these, I'll do conflict acts, and we'll just kind of build out a setting as an example of what you can do just in a short period of time. So with that, thank you guys, and I will talk to you next week.